The air was a razor. Thin, cold, and sharp enough to cut the breath from your lungs before you could even taste the dust in it. Major Eva Rostova gripped the yoke of the C-130 Hercules, her knuckles white mountains on the dark landscape of her. Flight gloves. Below, the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush clawed at the sky, a fortress of rock and shadow under a sliver of moon. This was Afghanistan, the graveyard of empires, and tonight, it felt like it was digging a grave for 6 of America's finest. Altitude 22,000, Major, hissed the voice of her co-pilot, a young lieutenant named Miller whose face was a pale, nervous moon in the green glow of the cockpit instruments. We are burning fuel faster than a frat boy burns through his daddy's credit card. We can't stay up here forever. Eva didn't answer. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were fixed on the thermal imaging display. It showed a canyon, a brutal scar in the earth no wider than a city street. And in that canyon, 6 tiny, bright white figures were pinned down, their heat signatures flickering like dying embers. SEAL Team Orion, the best of the best, sent on a deniable op to snatch a high-value target, only to have the mission implode. Now they were surrounded, out of ammo, with a legion of insurgents closing in from the high ground. Command says no go. On extraction, Miller's voice cracked. The canyon's too tight, underground defenses are active, and the brass says it's an acceptable loss. Acceptable loss, he repeated, the words tasting like poison. Eva's jaw tightened. She could feel the vibration of the 4 Allison turboprop engines through the flight stick, a steady, powerful hum that was the only thing keeping them from becoming another ghost in these mountains. Acceptable loss. 6 men, husbands, fathers, sons, reduced to a tactical calculation on a general spreadsheet back in some climate-controlled bunker in Bagram. She'd seen those spreadsheets. She'd seen the men whose lives were erased by them. Her mind flashed back 2 years, to a different cockpit, a different life. She was Captain Rostova then, a hotshot pilot with a swagger and a reputation for flying anything, anywhere. She was married to the Air Force, but her heart belonged to a man on the ground, a Green Beret named Ben. She remembered the scent of his skin, a mix of gun oil, sweat, and the cheap coffee they served in the mess hall. She remembered the weight of his hand in hers, the calloused fingers a map of a life lived on the edge. And she remembered the last time she saw him, his smile a flash of white in the pre-dawn gloom as he boarded a Chinook for a mission just like this one. A mission he never came back from. The official report called it an acceptable loss. The memory was a hot poker in her gut. She blinked, forcing the ghost of Ben from her mind, focusing on the 6 living men below. She could hear their comms, faint and desperate, a chaotic symphony of clipped phrases and ragged breaths. 2 mics out, moving to the North Ridge. Suppressing fire, but they're flanking us. Viper is down. I repeat, Viper is down. A cold dread washed over her. She knew these men. Not personally, but she knew their kind. The quiet professionals who walked into the darkest corners of the world so people back home could sleep safely. They were the tip of the spear, and the spear was about to break. Major, what are you doing? Miller's voice was sharp with alarm. Eva had pushed the yoke forward, nosing the massive C-130 into a steep, terrifying dive. The plane groaned in protest, the metal skin screaming as it fought against the wind. Alarms blared, a cacophony of electronic panic. I'm getting them out, she said, her voice a low, steady growl that cut through the noise. You can't. Command ordered us to stand down. That canyon is a death trap. It's not a runway. It's a coffin. Every runway is a coffin until you land on it, Eva retorted, her eyes scanning the terrain, her mind a supercomputer calculating angles, wind shear, and the terrifyingly small margin for error. She wasn't just flying a plane, she was threading a needle in a hurricane. With a 4-engine, 70-ton needled, she'd heard the whispers back at the base. They called her the ghost of Kandahar. Not because she was stealthy, but because they said she was haunted. Haunted by her dead husband, by the mission that took him. The other pilots, mostly men, kept their distance. They saw the fire in her eyes and mistook it for madness. They saw her relentless hours in the simulator, her obsessive study of topographical maps, and called it a death wish. Colonel Thompson, her commanding officer, had grounded her from combat missions for 6 months after Ben's death, citing emotional instability. He'd only put her back on the roster because he was short on experienced pilots. He'd given her this milk run, a simple supply drop to a forward operating base, thinking it was safe. Thinking she couldn't find trouble. He didn't know. That for Eva Rostova, trouble was a magnet. And right now, it was pulling her straight into the heart of the mountain. The canyon walls rushed up to meet them, a blur of rock and ice. Eva could see the muzzle flashes from the ground, angry orange sparks winking in the darkness. The plane shuddered as bullets stitched across its fuselage, the sound like a hailstorm on a tin roof. "They're shooting at us. We are taking fire." Miller yelled, his hands hovering uselessly over his own controls. "I noticed," Eva said, her voice unnervingly calm. She flicked a series of switches, killing the exterior lights, plunging them into near-total darkness. Flying on instruments and instinct alone. She was a ghost now, a shadow moving through the valley of death. The canyon floor was a ribbon of sand and rock, littered with boulders the size of cars. It was impossibly short, impossibly narrow. Landing a C-130 here wasn't just against the rules. It was against the laws of physics. But Eva had spent the last 2 years at war with the laws of physics, at war with the rules, at war with the very concept of impossible. Because impossible was what had taken her husband, she lowered the landing gear, the heavy thud resonating through the airframe. She dropped the flaps, feeling the big plane slow, becoming a lumbering, vulnerable beast. The ground was coming. Up fast. Too fast. "Pull up. Major, for God's sake, pull up." Miller screamed, his training and his terror warring for control. Eva ignored him. She could see them now, the 5 remaining SEALs, dragging their wounded comrade, their faces lit by the strobing hell of the firefight. They looked up, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and a desperate, fragile hope. They saw not a plane, but a miracle, a 4-engine angel of mercy descending into hell. But the miracle was about to hit a wall. A sheer rock face loomed at the end of the makeshift runway, a granite tombstone waiting to claim them all. There wasn't enough room to land. There wasn't enough room to stop. Miller was chanting a prayer, his eyes squeezed shut. The plane bucked and swayed, fighting her control. The stall horn began to shriek, a final, piercing warning of imminent failure. The rock face filled the cockpit window, a solid wall of grey death. Eva's hand shot out, not to the yoke, but to a large, red lever on the central console. A lever that was only ever to be used in the most dire of emergencies. A lever that would change everything. She wrapped her fingers around it, the cold plastic a stark contrast to the heat flooding her veins. She took one last, steadying breath. The smell of ozone and fear filling the cockpit. The sound that came next would change everything. The sound was not the catastrophic crunch of metal on rock that Lieutenant Miller had been expecting. It was a deafening, concussive roar that seemed to rip the air apart, followed by the violent, shuddering deployment of the C-130's thrust reversers. But Eva had done something more. The red lever she'd pulled was connected to the JATO system, jet-assisted takeoff, a series of small, solid-fuel rockets strapped to the fuselage. They were designed to get a heavy plane off a short runway, not to stop it on one. Using them for landing was an act of pure, unadulterated madness. The G-forces slammed Miller back into his seat, stealing his breath. The plane, which had been hurtling toward oblivion, decelerated with brutal, physics-defying violence. It felt like hitting a brick wall at 100 miles an hour. Outside, the world was a maelstrom of dust, smoke, and screaming engines. The plane skidded, its tires shrieking in protest as they fought for purchase on the loose gravel, and finally, with a groan that seemed to echo through the very soul of the aircraft, it lurched to a halt. The tip of the plane's nose was less than 10 feet from the canyon wall. Silence descended, broken only by the frantic ticking of cooling metal and Miller's ragged, disbelieving gasps. "Ramp down," Eva commanded, her voice as steady as if she'd just parallel parked a sedan. She was already unbuckling, her movements economical and precise. On the ground, the SEALs stared, frozen in a state of shock. The firefight had momentarily ceased, the insurgents on the ridges as stunned as the Americans by the sudden appearance of the massive aircraft. The rear ramp of the C-130 slammed down onto the rocky ground, and a lone figure emerged from the cavernous interior, the loadmaster, a grizzled sergeant with a face like a road map of every war since Vietnam. "Well, don't just stand there. Gawking," he bellowed over the whine of the still-running engines. "This ain't a tourist bus. Get your butts on board before the welcome party starts up again." The SEALs, jolted back to life, scrambled into action. They half-carried, half-dragged their wounded teammate up the ramp, their movements a testament to their training and discipline. The team leader, a lieutenant commander who went by the call sign Spectre, was the last one on. He paused. At the top of the ramp, turning to look back at the cockpit, his eyes searching for the pilot who had just pulled them out of the fire. All he could see was a silhouette against the green instrument glowed as the ramp began to rise. The insurgents regrouped, and the canyon once again erupted in a storm of gunfire. Bullets pinged off the fuselage as Eva pushed the throttles to the firewall. The C-130, now dangerously light without its cargo, roared like a wounded beast. She didn't have enough room for a conventional takeoff. She didn't even have enough room for a JATO-assisted one. "What are you doing?" Miller asked, his voice now a whisper of, or rather than terror, "Making a new exit," Eva said. She spun the plane in a tight, impossible circle, its wingtips seeming to scrape the canyon. Walls. She wasn't aiming for the sky. She was aiming straight back the way they had come, taxiing at a speed that threatened to tear the landing gear clean off. The SEALs braced themselves in the cargo bay, listening to the thunder of the engines and the relentless hail of bullets. Against the hull. They were trading one death trap for another. Eva raced the plane down the short, rock-strewn stretch of canyon floor, building every ounce of speed she could. Then, with a timing that was more art than science, she pulled back hard on the yoke. The C-130 leaped into the air, clawing for altitude, its engines screaming in protest. It cleared the canyon rim by what felt like inches, a huge, lumbering bird escaping the jaws of the earth. As they climbed into the relative safety of the night sky, a cheer erupted from the cargo bay. They were alive. Against all odds, they were alive. The flight back to Bagram was tense and quiet. Eva flew with a focused intensity, her mind already replaying every second of the landing, analyzing every decision, every risk. When they finally touched down, the runway lights a welcome sight after the suffocating darkness of the mountains. An army of emergency vehicles was waiting for them, their flashing lights painting the scene in frantic strokes of red and blue. Colonel Thompson was the first one up the ladder. His face was a thundercloud, his eyes promising a storm of biblical proportions. He stormed into the cockpit, his gaze falling on Eva. "Major Rostova," he began, his voice deceptively calm. "Care to explain to me what part of stand down and direct order you failed to comprehend?" Before Eva could answer, the curtain to the cockpit was pushed aside. Spectre, the SEAL team leader, stood there. His face was smeared with grime and blood, but his eyes were clear and direct. He looked at Colonel Thompson, then at Eva. "Colonel," Spectre said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded attention. "Whatever this pilot did, she did it to save my men. We were dead. End of story. Your pilot, sir, just rewrote the ending." Thompson's jaw worked, but he said nothing. He looked from the stone-faced SEAL commander to the defiant female major. He saw the bullet holes riddling the side of his aircraft. He saw the raw, unadulterated fury in Eva's eyes, and for the first time, he seemed to understand that it wasn't madness he was looking at. It was something else entirely. Something far more dangerous. The debriefing was a formality. The SEALs gave their report, a sanitized version that highlighted the mission's success in acquiring intel before being compromised, and glossed over the part where they were nearly wiped out. Eva's flight logs were confiscated, the C-130 was cordoned off, and she was officially grounded, pending a full investigation. The whispers started almost immediately. In the mess hall, at the pilot's ready room, in the smoky corners of the makeshift bar on base. The story of the landing in the canyon spread like wildfire, mutating with each telling. Some said she'd landed on a postage stamp. Others claimed she'd flown the plane backward. But the one detail that remained constant was the pilot's identity. Major Eva Rostova. The ghost of Kandahar. The mockery she had endured before was replaced by something new. A grudging, fearful respect from some, but from others, a sharpened resentment. The male pilots who had once dismissed her as emotionally unstable now saw her as a reckless hothead, a loose cannon who had endangered a valuable asset. The plane, for 6 grunts, she got lucky. One of them, a swaggering F-16 pilot named Decker, said loudly over lunch one day, making sure Eva could hear him from her table in the corner. Pure, dumb luck. She probably broke the plane's back with that JATO stunt. Any real pilot knows you don't risk a $100 million aircraft for a handful of trigger pullers. Eva kept her eyes on her tray of grey, unappetizing food. She didn't rise to the bait. She was used to the likes of Decker. Men who measured their worth in engine thrust and flight hours, who saw the world as a clear hierarchy with them at the top. They couldn't comprehend her actions because they couldn't comprehend her reasons. They saw a plane, she saw a lifeline. They saw soldiers, She saw Ben's face, his laughing eyes, his final, fading smile, but Decker wasn't finished. He sauntered over to her table, leaning over her, his presence a cloud of cheap cologne and arrogance. You know, Rostova, the brass should have washed you out after your husband bought it. It's clear you've got a death wish. The problem is, you're going to take someone else with you when you finally punch your ticket. Eva slowly lifted her head, her sea-storm eyes meeting his. She didn't say a word. She just looked at him, and in her gaze, Decker saw a cold, hard certainty that unnerved him. He saw a woman who had walked through fire and wasn't afraid of getting burned. He faltered, his smirk wavering. Whatever, he muttered, turning and walking away. You're a menace. The injustice of it burned hotter than any engine fire. She had saved 6 lives, and for it, she was being treated like a criminal. Colonel Thompson confined her to quarters, her career hanging by a thread. She spent her days reading, exercising, and trying not to let the 4 walls of a small room close in on her. But at night, the ghosts came. Ben's ghost, and the new ghosts of the men she might not be able to save next time. A week after the incident, she was summoned to Thompson's office. She expected the worst, a court-martial, a dishonorable discharge. She walked in, her back straight, her expression a mask of neutrality. Thompson was standing by the window, looking out at the dusty, sun-bleached expanse of the airbase. The investigation is complete, he said without turning around. The aircraft sustained significant structural damage. The cost of repairs will be astronomical. You violated a direct order. You engaged in a flight maneuver that has a 99% chance of catastrophic failure. By all rights, I should have you on a plane back to the States in handcuffs. He turned to face her, his eyes hard. But I have a problem, Major. My problem is that SEAL Team Orion recovered a laptop from the high-value target before they were compromised. On that laptop is intel detailing a planned attack. A big one. A coordinated assault on multiple forward operating bases, scheduled to happen in 72 hours. Eva's heart began to beat a little faster. This was more than just a reprimand. The intel is encrypted, but the SEAL's tech guys are working on it, Thompson continued. What we do know is that the enemy has acquired something new. Something that changes the game. According to a fragment of decrypted text, it's some kind of advanced anti-aircraft system, capable of targeting and destroying high-altitude aircraft. Our satellites can't see it. Our drones can't get close enough. We are flying blind. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The intel also points to a location, a central command and control hub for the entire operation, hidden deep in a mountain range even more treacherous than the one you just came out of. The place is a fortress. We can't bomb it without knowing what this new weapon is, or we risk losing a B-2 bomber and its crew. We can't send in a large ground force. The only way in is with a small, specialized team. And the only way to get them there is to fly them in low, under the radar, through a maze of canyons that makes your last little joyride look like a trip to the grocery store. He stepped closer, his eyes boring into hers. I have a squadron of pilots who, on paper, are more qualified than you. They have more flight hours, more commendations. But I showed them the topographical data. I showed them the mission profile. They all said the same thing. What did they say? Eva asked, her voice quiet. Thompson's expression was a mixture of frustration and a strange, newfound respect. They said it's impossible. They said it's a suicide mission. He took a deep breath. Spectre and his team have volunteered. They believe the intel on that laptop is the key to stopping this new weapon. They're willing to go back in, but they'll only go with one pilot. He didn't need to say her name. Eva felt a cold, clear sense of purpose settle over her. This was it. This was the reason she had pushed herself, the reason she had stuttered. The maps, the reason she had spent countless hours in the simulator, practicing the impossible. It wasn't a death wish that drove her. It was a promise. A promise she had made to Ben's ghost, that she would never let another soldier be just a name on a list of acceptable losses. They want you, Rostova, Thompson said, the words hanging in the air between them. They're asking for the one pilot on this base crazy enough to even try. The question was unspoken but obvious. Would she do it? Would she fly back into the jaws of death, into a mission that every other pilot believed was a one-way trip? But as she met her commander's gaze, a new, Chilling thought entered her mind. Why were the SEALs so insistent on her? Spectre had seen her fly, yes. But was there another reason? A suspicion, cold and sharp, pricked at the edge of her consciousness. The mission had gone wrong. The intel was almost too convenient. Something felt off. It was a dissonant note in an otherwise clear melody of duty and danger. Was she being chosen for her skill, or was she being set up for something else? The briefing room was cold, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and nervous tension. A large, high-resolution satellite map of the Tora Bora mountain range was projected onto the main screen, a terrifying spider web of deep valleys and razor-sharp ridges. It looked like the surface of a dead planet. Colonel Thompson stood at the front of the room, his pointer tracing a red line through the most treacherous part of the terrain. "This is your route," he said, his voice grim. "We are calling it the Serpent Spine. You'll fly. In a nap of the Earth, no higher than 100 feet off the deck. You'll be navigating by sight and by instruments, in complete darkness and under total radio silence. Your target is here." He tapped a small, isolated plateau deep within. "The mountain fortress. We believe this is the command hub, and the location of the new anti-aircraft system. Codename, Cerberus. Eva studied the route, her mind already flying it, visualizing every turn, every climb, every gut-wrenching descent. It was a pilot's nightmare. The canyons were tighter, the weather more unpredictable, and the margins for error were non-existent. One mistake, one moment of hesitation, and they would be a fiery smear on a mountainside. Spectre and his 5-man team sat in the front row, their faces impassive masks. They were stripped down to their essential gear, their movements economical, their presence filling the room with a quiet, lethal intensity. Eva felt their eyes on her, and the suspicion she'd felt in Thompson's office returned. They weren't just trusting her, they were watching her. There was a current of something unspoken flowing between the SEALs, a shared secret that she was not privy to. "The intel from the laptop is still being decrypted," Thompson continued, "but we've pulled one more fragment. It's a name, Kalen. We believe he's the architect of this Cerberus system. An ex-MI6 engineer who went rogue, sold his services to the highest bidder. He's a ghost, but is brilliant, and he has a reputation for building weapons that are a generation ahead of anything we have." A name, Kalen. It meant nothing to Eva, but she filed it away. In her experience, names always ended up meaning something. "You'll be flying a modified MC-130 Combat Talon," Thompson said, nodding towards Eva. "We've stripped it of all non-essential weight and fitted it with an experimental terrain-following radar system. It's supposed to be state-of-the-art, but it's buggy as all hell. It will be your eyes and ears in those canyons. Lieutenant Miller has declined to volunteer for this mission. Your co-pilot will be Chief Warrant Officer Davies." A man in his late 40s with a salt and pepper mustache and calm, steady eyes gave Eva a slight nod from across the room. Davies was a legend among the C-130 crews, a man who had forgotten more about flying the Hercules than most pilots ever learned. He was a safe pair of hands, a reassuring presence. But Eva knew that in the Serpent Spine, there was no such thing as safety. Day as the briefing concluded, Spectre approached her. "Major," he said, his voice low, "my team is ready. We trust you to get us there." "And I trust you to have my back when we land," Eva replied, her eyes searching his for a hint of the secret he was keeping. But his expression was unreadable, a calm surface on a deep, dark lake. The hours leading up to the mission were a blur of preparation. Eva and Davies spent 6 straight hours in the simulator, flying the Serpent Spine route over and over again. The simulation was so realistic that by the end, Eva's uniform was soaked with sweat, her muscles aching from the tension. The experimental radar system was indeed buggy, flickering in and out at critical moments, forcing her to rely on instinct and Davies's calm, precise callouts. As she walked to the flight line under the cover of darkness, the familiar pre-mission jitters were absent. In their place was a cold, hard resolve. But the nagging feeling of being a pawn in a larger game persisted. The mission felt too clean, the pieces fitting together too perfectly. The compromised op, the convenient laptop, the impossible extraction, and now the even more impossible insertion. It felt like a script. And she was the lead actress, not knowing if the final scene was a triumph or a tragedy. The flight to the edge of the Tora Bora range was uneventful. They flew high and fast, a ghost in the upper atmosphere. But as they approached the entry point to the Serpent Spine, Eva began her descent, taking the big plane down into the Wolf's Den, dropping below radar coverage now, Davies said, his voice calm in her headset. We are on our own. The world outside the cockpit window dissolved into a terrifying, high-speed blur of rock and shadow. The terrain-following radar flickered to life, painting the landscape in ghostly green lines on her display. Eva's hands moved with practiced grace over the controls, her input small and precise. She was no longer flying a plane, she was wearing it. It was an extension of her own body, her own will. They plunged into the first canyon, the wingtips of the C-130 seeming to brush against the sheer rock walls. The air grew turbulent, the plane bucking and shaking as it fought the angry mountain winds, crosswind at 20 knots, gusting to 30, Davies reported, his eyes glued to the instruments. Watch your left drift. I see it, Eva said, her teeth clenched. For what felt like an eternity, they flew through the winding maze. Every turn revealed a new danger, a new challenge. A sudden downdraft that tried to slam them into the canyon floor. A rock spire that appeared out of the darkness like a granite spear. Through it all, Eva flew with a preternatural calm, her mind and body in perfect sync. I in the cargo bay. The SEALs sat in silence, strapped into their seats, their trust absolute. They could feel every stomach-lurching drop, every bone-jarring turn. They were warriors, men who had faced death 100 times. But in the back of this plane, in the hands of this pilot, they were utterly helpless. Their lives depended on the skill of the woman in the cockpit. Suddenly, a new alarm blared. Through the cockpit. A high-pitched, insistent tone that Eva had never heard before. What is that? She demanded. Davies's face was pale. I don't know. It's not one of ours. Some kind of proximity alert. It's locking onto us. On the main screen, a red symbol appeared. It was moving fast, closing in from behind. We have a bogey, Davies said, his voice tight. Unidentified aircraft, closing fast. That's impossible, Eva shot back. No one can fly in these canyons. No one but us. But the red symbol was undeniable. It was real, and it was hunting them. The game had changed. They were no longer the predators, slipping unseen through the mountains. They were the prey. It's getting a weapons lock. Davies shouted. The peaceful green glow of the cockpit was shattered by the flashing red lights of a missile warning. The hunt was over. The fight was about to begin. Eva's mind raced. Who was it? The insurgents didn't have aircraft capable of this. Was it a Pakistani jet that had strayed off course? Or was it something else? Something connected to the Cerberus system. The suspicion that had been simmering in her mind now boiled over. This was the twist. This was the part of the script she hadn't been given. The mission wasn't just to infiltrate a fortress. It was a trap. And she had flown them right into it. Hold on, she gritted out, pushing the throttles to the firewall. The C-130 surged forward, its engines screaming in the narrow canyon. Major, you can't outrun a missile in this tin can. Davies yelled. I'm not going to outrun it, Eva said, a wild, desperate plan forming in her mind. Her eyes darted around the cockpit, settling on the display for the experimental radar system. It was buggy, unreliable, but it was all she had. I'm going to lose it. She yanked the plane into a hard right turn, diving into an even narrower side canyon that the mission planners had marked as a dead end. It was a gamble of insane proportions. If she was wrong, if the canyon truly was a dead end, they would be trapped, a sitting duck for whatever was hunting them. The missile alarm shrieked, a countdown to oblivion. The red symbol on her screen was almost on top of them. She could feel the sweat trickling down her spine, the icy grip of fear trying to cloud her judgment. She thought of Ben. She thought of the promise she had made. Then, a new voice crackled over the comms. It wasn't Davies. It wasn't Thompson. It was Spectre, from the cargo bay. And what he said sent a bolt of ice through Eva's veins. Major, whatever you do not trust the radar. I repeat, the terrain-following system has been compromised. The revelation hit her with the force of a physical blow. The buggy radar wasn't just faulty. It was feeding them false information. It was a Trojan horse, leading them not to their target, but to their doom. The dead-end canyon she had just dived into. It might not be a dead end on the map, but, in reality, it could be a solid wall of rock. She was flying blind, in a trap, with a missile seconds from impact, and the one system she was relying on was actively trying to kill her. Kill the radar, Eva snapped, her voice cutting through the rising panic in the cockpit. What? Davies stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. Major, it's the only thing keeping us from hitting a wall. It's a liar, Eva retorted, her eyes fixed on the dark void beyond the cockpit window. Spectre's warning confirmed her deepest fears. The betrayal wasn't just a possibility. It was an active threat, happening in real time. The buggy system wasn't a bug. It was a feature. Someone wanted them dead, and they were using the Air Force's own cutting-edge technology to do it. Her mind was a whirlwind of calculations. The missile was seconds away. The canyon walls were an unseen, lethal threat. And the SEALs in the back were trusting her to pull another miracle out of her hat. She flicked a switch, and the green, treacherous lines of the terrain-following radar vanished from her screen, plunging them into an even deeper level of blindness. They were now flying on memory from the simulator, raw instinct, and the hope that Spectre's warning hadn't come too late. Chaff. Fleurs. Now, she commanded. Davies's hands flew over the console, and the C-130 ejected a cloud of aluminum strips and burning magnesium flares, a desperate attempt to confuse the incoming missile's guidance system. Outside, the canyon was momentarily lit by the brilliant, incandescent bloom of the countermeasures. In that fleeting, strobe-like flash of light, Eva saw it. The canyon ahead wasn't a dead end. It opened up into a wider basin. But she also saw the missile, a sleek, dark shape streaking through the fiery cloud of the flares, its course unaltered. It's still on us. Davies yelled. It's a laser-guided missile. Chaff and flares won't work. Of course. Kalen, the rogue engineer. He wouldn't build a system that could be defeated by decades-old technology. This was something new, something smarter. The missile was 5 seconds from impact. Time seemed to slow down, each heartbeat a drumbeat in the countdown to oblivion. Eva's eyes scanned the darkness, her pilot's intuition screaming at her. She needed to break the laser lock. But how? Her gaze fell on the canyon floor. It was covered in a thin layer of snow, a white, reflective blanket in the darkness. An idea, born of desperation and a deep understanding of physics, sparked in her mind. It was insane. It was suicidal. It was the only chance they had. Full flaps. Gear down, she ordered. We are not landing. Davies protested, his voice strained. No, Eva said, her knuckles white on the yoke. We are kicking up some dust. She pushed the nose down, sending the massive plane into a terrifyingly steep dive toward the canyon floor. She wasn't trying to land. She was trying to get as low as humanly possible. The ground rushed up to meet them. The proximity alarm, the real one, shrieked a frantic, solid tone. They were seconds from becoming a crater. At the last possible moment. With the landing gear seeming to skim the tops of the rocks, she pulled back hard on the yoke. The C-130 responded, its nose clawing for the sky. But the violent maneuver had a secondary effect. The powerful wash from the 4 giant propellers hit the snow-covered ground like a hurricane, blasting a colossal cloud of snow, dust, and debris into the air. The world outside the cockpit became a blinding, swirling vortex of white. They were flying through a self-made blizzard. For a heart-stopping second, Eva had no idea which way was up. But her plan had worked. The dense cloud of particulate matter had momentarily scattered the guidance laser. The missile, its lock broken, streaked past them, its intended target now obscured. It slammed into the canyon wall a half-mile ahead of them with a deafening explosion that lit up the entire basin, the shockwave buffeting their plane like a toy. They were alive. Shaken, battered, but alive. Radars back online, Davies said, his voice trembling slightly. The real radar. I've isolated the compromised system. We are clean. What about our tail? Eva asked, leveling the plane out. Gone, Davies confirmed. Whatever it was, it's vanished. Probably didn't want to stick around after firing a missile. Eva's mind was racing. The compromised radar, the advanced missile, the ghost, aircraft that could navigate these canyons, it all pointed to one man, Kalen. This wasn't just a collection of insurgent fighters. This was a sophisticated, technologically advanced enemy. And they had a traitor on the inside, someone who could tamper with the mission-critical systems of a US Air Force combat talon. Who? And why? The questions would have to wait. They were still deep in enemy territory, and they had a mission to complete. With Davies now feeding her reliable data, Eva navigated the rest of the Serpent Spine, her flying fueled by a new, cold fury. This was personal now. Someone had tried to kill her and her crew, and they had used the very technology designed to protect them. They finally broke through the last canyon and saw their target, the isolated plateau, a flat-topped mountain rising out of the surrounding peaks like a giant's anvil. A handful of low, nondescript buildings were clustered on its surface. It looked quiet. Too quiet. I'm not seeing any air defenses, Davy said, scanning the area with their sensors. No SAM sites, no anti-aircraft guns. Nothing. It's here, Eva said, her gut telling her that the danger was simply hidden. The Cerberus system. It's not something we can see. It's something that sees us. She brought the C-130 in for a low pass, her eyes scanning the ground. She was looking for the landing zone, a short, flat stretch of ground the mission planners had identified. But as they got closer, her blood ran cold. The landing zone wasn't there. In its place was a field of jagged, upright rocks, like dragons. Teeth, specifically placed to prevent any aircraft from landing. The intel was wrong, Davies breathed. It's another trap. The entire mission was a lie. The route, the radar, the landing zone. Every piece of information they had been given was designed to lead them to this exact spot, to this exact moment, and to their deaths. Spectre, Eva said over the comms, her voice tight with controlled anger. Your intel is garbage. The LZ is a rock garden. There's nowhere to land. There was a pause, and then Spectre's voice came back, laced with an urgency she hadn't heard before. We know. The decryption on the laptop is complete. We've been feeding you the real intel piece by piece. The compromised radar, the missile, we knew they were coming. We just couldn't tell you until we were sure you were clear of the traitor's influence. Eva felt a surge of fury. You used us as bait. We had to. Spectre's voice was unapologetic. We had to draw out the ghost plane. We had to confirm Kalen was here. The traitor isn't just feeding him intel, they're feeding him our tech. That compromised radar system was a beta version, stolen from a development lab in Nevada 2 months ago. This is bigger than just an attack in Afghanistan. This is about a massive technological breach. Kalen is not just selling to insurgents, he's building a private army with stolen, next-generation American weapons. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place in Eva's mind. The mission wasn't about stopping a local attack. It was about stopping a global threat, a man who had the power to turn America's own weapons against itself. The real LZ is on the north side of the plateau, Spectre continued. But it's not a runway. It's the roof of the main command building. It's reinforced, but it's short. Dangerously short. Eva looked at the building. It was a long, flat structure, maybe 400 feet from end to end. Landing a C-130 on it was even more impossible than the canyon landing. It was a feat of aviation that had never been attempted, never even been conceived of. And one more thing, Major, Spectre said, his voice dropping. Cerberus is active. We've identified it. It's not a missile battery. It's a network of high-energy laser emitters. They're hidden in retractable turrets all over the plateau. The second our wheels touch that roof, they're going to slice your plane into confetti. Eva stared at the rooftop, her mind reeling. A runway that was too short, defended by a weapon she couldn't see and couldn't evade. The enemy knew they were coming. They knew exactly what she was capable of. They had designed the perfect trap, a cage with no exit. Time was running out. Their fuel was low. The ghost plane could return at any moment. The weight of the mission, the lives of the SEALs, the threat of Kalen's stolen technology, it all rested on her shoulders. She had to put this plane down on a rooftop that was actively trying to kill her. She took a deep breath, her hands steady on the controls. She had faced the impossible before. She had flown into the jaws of death and spit in its eye. But this was different. This was a checkmate. Every move she could make was a losing one. But then, her eyes fell on the JATO rocket controls. She had used them to stop, but they were designed to make the plane go. An idea, crazier and more desperate than any she'd had before, began to form. A plan that involved fire, speed, and a prayer to the gods of aerodynamics. Spectre, she said into the comms, her voice ringing with a newfound, terrifying certainty. Get your men ready. We are going in. And we're going in hot. She looked at Davies, a grim smile touching her lips. Strap yourself in, Chief. We're about to break a few more laws of physics. What do you mean, going in hot? Davies asked, his calm demeanor finally cracking. Major, the lasers will cut us to pieces before we even get the ramp down. The lasers are controlled by a central command hub, Eva said, her mind racing, connecting the dots from Spectre's intel. And that hub is the building we are landing on. The system is designed to protect the airspace around the plateau, not the plateau itself. It's got a blind spot, a donut hole right in the middle. The problem is, to get into that hole, we have to drop in almost vertically. It's too steep an approach. We'd stall and fall out of the sky. So we can't approach high. Davies said, catching on. And we can't approach low because the lasers will get us. So we can't land. Not in one piece, Eva corrected him, her eyes gleaming with the fire of a mad genius. But maybe we don't have to. She banked the C-130 hard, circling the plateau, staying just outside the engagement range of the Cerberus system. She was studying the layout, the wind, the placement of the hidden laser turrets. Spectre, she said over the comms. How long will it take you to disable Cerberus once you're on the ground? My tech specialist says he can hack the system from the rooftop control panel. Give him 90 seconds from the moment we're out of the plane. 90 seconds. An eternity under fire. A lifetime when you're a stationary target on a rooftop. You've got 60, Eva said. Davies, get ready to vent fuel. Vent fuel? Major, we barely have enough to get home. Who said anything about going home? Eva replied, her voice chillingly calm. She pushed the yoke forward, nosing the plane into a shallow dive, aiming not for the rooftop, but for the very edge of the plateau, a spot hundreds of feet below the command building. She was flying straight into the kill zone. Lasers are tracking us. Davies shouted as red warning lights flashed across the console. Beams of pure energy, invisible to the naked eye, began to slice through the air around them. One of them caught the tip of the right wing, and a 3-foot section of metal simply vanished, vaporized into nothingness with a silent, terrifying flash. The plane lurched violently. Hold on! Eva yelled, fighting the controls. She kept the plane in its dive, pushing it faster and faster, a game of chicken with a weapon that didn't blink. Just as the system was about to get a solid lock, she did two things at once. She hit the fuel venting switch and pulled the plane up into a gut-wrenching, near-vertical climb. A massive plume of jet fuel sprayed from the wings, creating a thick, atomized cloud behind them. The laser beams, seeking their target, hit the fuel vapor. The result was a colossal, air-sucking fireball. A roiling, orange and black explosion that momentarily blinded the Cerberus system's optical sensors. They had a window. A few seconds of chaos before the system could reacquire them. Eva used the momentum from the climb to execute a wingover, a stall turn that left the C-130 hanging almost motionless in the air, its belly pointed toward the rooftop, before its nose dropped and it plunged downward like a hawk. They were falling, not flying, dropping into the system's blind spot. She pulled out of the dive just feet above the rooftop, the landing gear slamming down onto the reinforced concrete with a bone-jarring impact that screamed through the airframe. The plane was down. But it was far too fast, hurtling toward the far edge of the roof and a 1,000-foot drop. Jato, she screamed. Davies, anticipating the command, fired the rockets. The plane was slammed backward by the force, decelerating with the same brutal violence as it had in the canyon. It skidded, groaned, and finally shuddered to a halt, its nose hanging precariously over the edge of the building. Go, go, go! Eva yelled into the comms. The rear ramp slammed down, and the 6 SEALs poured out, fanning across the rooftop, and laying down a perimeter of suppressive fire as hidden doors slid open and enemy soldiers began to emerge. Spectre and his tech specialist sprinted for the control panel. Eva and Davies were sitting ducks. The plane was a giant, unmissable target. The 9-second clock had started. 45 seconds. Davies called out, watching the firefight. Rage outside. The plane shuddered as bullets and RPGs began to impact the fuselage. Alarms screamed through the cockpit. The number 2 engine was on fire. 30 seconds. Spectre's tech specialist was frantically working on the panel, his fingers flying across the keypad while Spectre and the others provided cover, their rifles barking in the cold mountain air. 15. Suddenly, the enemy soldiers fell. back, retreating into their bunkers. An eerie silence fell over the rooftop. "It's a trap." Spector's voice yelled over the comms. "They are pulling back." "Why are they?" He was cut off by a deep, resonant hum. The rooftop beneath the C-130 began to vibrate. "Major, get out of there." Spector shouted. "The roof is opening. Up. It's an elevator. They're taking the whole plane." Eva's eyes widened in horror. The entire rooftop was a massive platform, and it was now descending into the mountain. They hadn't landed on a building. They had landed on a cage. The perfect trap had been sprung. The walls of the hangar rose around them as they descended into a vast, cavernous space carved out of the rock. It was a state-of-the-art military facility, buzzing with activity. And standing there, waiting for them, was a man in a tailored suit, his face calm and smiling, flanked by a dozen heavily armed soldiers wearing advanced combat gear. "Major Rostova," the man said, his voice amplified through the hangar's PA system. It was a cultured, British accent. "A pleasure to finally meet you. I am Kalen. I've been so looking forward to studying your magnificent aircraft. And, of course, its rather famous pilot." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The traitor. It wasn't a soldier. It wasn't a technician. It was the technology itself. Kalen hadn't just stolen the radar schematics. He had embedded a backdoor, a kill switch, into the software that the Air Force was now using. He had been playing them from the very beginning. "You've been a worthy adversary, Major," Kalen continued, his smile never wavering. "But the game is over. Surrender, and I may let you and your men live." Eva looked at Davies. His face was grim. She looked at the SEALs, who had taken cover behind the plane, hopelessly outnumbered. This was it. The false ending. The moment the audience thinks the danger is over, only to have the stakes raised to an impossible new height. But Kalen had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated the ghost of Kandahar. He saw the pilot, but he didn't see the woman. He didn't see the ghost of Ben standing behind her, whispering in her ear. He didn't see the promise she had made on a cold, dark night 2 years ago. Eva's hand moved slowly, deliberately, to the throttle controls. The number 2 engine was on fire, but the other 3 were still functional. "What are you doing?" Davies whispered, his eyes wide. "He wants the plane," Eva whispered back, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "He can have it." She pushed the throttles for engines 1, 3, and 4 to their absolute maximum. The C-130, even damaged, was a beast of immense power. It strained against its brakes, its frame groaning, the roar of the engines a deafening. Thunder in the enclosed hangar. Kalen's smile finally faltered. "What is she doing? Stop her." His soldiers raised their weapons, but it was too late. Eva released the brakes. The C-130 leaped forward like an uncaged animal, straight toward Kalen and the hangar's main control center, which was situated behind a wall of reinforced glass just behind him. Kalen's men opened fire, their bullets ripping through the cockpit's windows, showering Eva and Davies in shattered plexiglass. A searing pain shot through Eva's left arm, but she didn't flinch. She kept her hands on the yoke, her eyes on the target. The plane, a 100-ton battering ram, slammed into the control center. The impact was cataclysmic. Metal shrieked, glass exploded, and the heart of Kalen's entire operation was obliterated in a single, fiery instant. Kalen himself, his face a perfect mask of arrogant surprise, was consumed by the explosion. Poetic justice. The prize he had so desperately coveted had become the instrument of his own destruction. The impact ruptured the plane's fuel tanks, and the hangar erupted in a secondary, even larger explosion. The SEALs used the chaos to their advantage, fighting their way through the remaining soldiers toward a service tunnel. Davies dragged Eva, bleeding and semi-conscious, from the flaming wreckage of the cockpit. "Come on, Major. We have to go." They scrambled into the tunnel just as the roof of the hangar began to collapse. They ran, fueled by adrenaline, through the dark, narrow passageways, the sound of the dying mountain fortress echoing behind them. They emerged hours later, blinking. In the harsh light of dawn, on a remote mountainside miles away, a rescue helicopter, alerted by a distress beacon Spector had activated, was already circling overhead. The flight back was quiet. Eva's arm was bandaged, the pain a dull throb. She looked at the faces of the men she had saved. Spector, Davies, the SEALs. In their eyes, she no longer saw suspicion or doubt. She saw respect. A deep, profound, and hard-earned respect. Weeks later, back in the United States, Eva stood before a panel of generals at the Pentagon. Colonel Thompson stood beside her. The debriefing was a mere formality. The full extent of Kalen's network and the technological breach had been uncovered. Eva wasn't just a hero, she had averted a global crisis. The head of the panel, a 4-star general with a chest full of ribbons, looked at her, his expression stern. Major Rostova, your methods are unorthodox, your actions reckless, and you have a penchant for destroying government property that is, frankly, alarming. Eva's heart sank. However, the general continued, a slight smile touching his lips, you have also demonstrated a level of skill, courage, and ingenuity that this Air Force has not seen in a generation. The word impossible, it seems, is not in your vocabulary. He paused. The President has personally signed off on this. Congratulations, Colonel Rostova. You're being given command of a new, experimental aviation unit. Your mission will be to write the book on what comes next, to fly the missions no one else can, to go where no one else dares. Eva stood a little taller, the promotion a vindication of every risk, every sacrifice. She thought of Ben. She thought of the whispers, the mockery, the men who had underestimated her. She had not only saved 6 men in a canyon, she had saved herself. She had found her purpose not in avoiding the ghosts of her past, but in flying with them, letting them guide her through the storm that as she walked out of the Pentagon, a newly minted colonel, she felt the sun on her face. The sky, vast and blue, stretched out before her. It was not a limit. It was an invitation. And Eva Rostova was just getting started.